Hey, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Happy Independence Day. Today, we're taping on the day that John Adams believed would be remembered by history, July 2nd. Who knows when this will air, but happy July 2nd. Bill Crystal notes that that might have been a harbinger of things to come, in the sense that a lot of what John Adams thought the country might become didn't pan out. So.
Well, and George Washington too. He envisioned no political parties, and that got and no foreign entanglements. So all that got disappeared pretty quickly.
This is true.
Yeah, and there's a whole lot about I think how the founders thought the country would be structured that didn't come to pass, which I don't think is a travesty or a violation of the sacrosanct utterances of the founders. It's just, like a lot of things, your initial vision, once it hits the road of reality, has to adjust.
Totally. But it is funny if you read this John Adams letter he wrote to Abigail Adams. The second day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epocha? I don't even know. In the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as a great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as a day of declaration. But now he does predict that it will be that it will spread across the continent,
right,
and be celebrated. So I mean, he was
He's
prescient
right.
in many ways.
It's right in the big scheme of things.
And I suspect. Now, Bill Crystal. I was going to write about this today, and I did, but I noticed Bill Crystal beat me to the punch, and I suspect it's because we both saw the replay on 60 Minutes of historian David McCullough, who was talking about this. They just replayed it Sunday on 60 Minutes, and I bet you anything that Bill Crystal saw that exact same special that I did, and that gave him the idea.
Now you mentioned Abigail. Everyone should watch the 36-part or whatever it is C-SPAN series on the First Ladies. Because it's excellent. It's an excellent presidential history as well as First Lady history, and there's lots of First Lady stuff that's relevant. So it's not just fashion and China patterns. The whole point of the series is that they played an integral role.
Abigail's famous letter, "Remember the Lady."
Well, I was gonna mention that. I mean, that's something I didn't know about, and that is that's a real fascinating, very very early feminist letter where she kind of playfully but seriously scolds John and say, when you write a little declaration there, remember the ladies. We're part of the democracy too.
Right.
And
she was Adams's secret weapon in many ways. They were partners. It was a great partnership, that marriage. They really loved each other. If you've seen the HBO, I think it was HBO, show about John Adams. But she was also part of some of his biggest mistakes, like the Alien and Sedition Acts as president. But Abigail, it's a great marriage. It's a great partnership, and I think you're right in terms of first ladies. She belongs in that pantheon.
Speaking of women in politics, a lot of Hillary talk this week. And you dove in after the New York.
Nice segue, Bill.
Thank you. So there was this New York Times piece culling some commentary from top Republicans saying that they're going to try to box a Hillary 2016 campaign, try to box her in on the age issue. And I remember you and I talked about this before. You've expressed some inner glee that the Democratic bench is aged, that it wouldn't be going forward generationally. If it was Hillary or Biden, it would be going backwards generationally, and that's not necessarily a good place for the party to be. Yet you did not. You didn't spike the football when this article came out of the Times. It unnerved you that the Republican intelligentsia was taking this tack.
Well, there's a lot to say here, Bill. I think, first of all, one interesting thing is that this was Jonathan Martin, who just went to the New York Times from Politico. I think one of his first stories, and a very good story. An interesting story. I also think it's interesting, coming on the heels of the Supreme Court decision last week, that I do suspect that part of the reason that Republicans have a much better bench may have to do with the Voting Rights Act. And we've seen people at the Atlantic and the Washington Post make this point, that there are unintended consequences whereby you have all of these majority-minority districts created and essentially gerrymandered so that you can elect more African Americans and other minorities to the House of Representatives. But what happens is they become, you put them in the most liberal districts possible, and they have a hard time winning statewide. And so you have Republicans, whether it's, Brian Sandoval, the governor of Nevada, or Susana Martinez, or Marco Rubio in Florida, Nikki Haley, you can go down the list. Republicans have a much stronger bench, not only in terms of youthful energy, but also in terms of, diverse ethnic diversity and racial diversity. So I think that's an interesting tie-in. But I do fear that this is the kind of thing that you want to use very sparingly, because the way that Hillary Clinton can really be most effective is if you turn her into a sympathetic victim and you perpetuate the war on women thing. So I think that the age issue is a factor, but it should be exploited very subtly. You just have pictures of Marco Rubio and his beautiful wife and their little children walking on a beach or something. You don't go out there and say Hillary's too old to be president. And I think that would very likely backfire. And
I never thought that your initial point on this subject was that there's some sort of age limit on the presidency, that someone's going to have their faculties, or as Rush said, who wants to look at some old woman age before your eyes? It never was on that vein. Yours talking more about, I would suggest more substantively, the feeling that is the image that's presented, that forward-thinking ideas versus backward-thinking ideas, and how that is exemplified by youthful vigor. I thought that's where you're going in the first place, and there wasn't really a gender element to it at all.
Right. Well, but I do think that what Rush said is probably better left unsaid, because the media can take something he said, as we saw with Senator Flute, and exploit it and make it somehow representative of the voice of Republicans. So he has to be very careful. I think he may have been onto something. We simply don't know if voters might be repelled by an older woman running for president, or if there might be a double standard. It wouldn't be fair, but it's possible that some voters might sort of a visceral reaction to that. But you're right, Bill. That was never my point. Was and this, frankly, I don't know if it's any more substantive, because it's really they're both symbolic. But my point was that with Hillary Clinton's age also comes baggage. So she's tied to these fights we've been fighting for generations. She's tied to Watergate. She's tied to Vietnam, the civil rights struggle. And America, having handed the torch to a new generation with Barack Obama, part of the reason for doing that is to turn the page on some of these old culture war battles that we've been fighting, that the American public may be reluctant to now go backwards generationally. Not because she's too old for the job, but because of the forward-looking thing.
Well, just to the first point, I think the Rush point, you're saying, maybe it's unfair, but maybe it's true. Maybe. I'm not trying to put you in the Rush camp. I think it's ridiculous to think that it might be true. We saw Margaret Thatcher age before our eyes. We saw Golda Meir age before our eyes. We were seeing Barack Obama age before our eyes. Every president, looks older by year 8 than year 1. I don't think that people would think that's any more strange to have a woman age than a man age. And if anything, if you're starting off in your late 60s, you're not going to age that much more. You're going to be where you are. It's going from more 40 to 50, where you might see more of a shift. And people expect presidents to age. I just don't think that's an odd thing. There's a certain degree of wanting a friendly face in the room for the time of presidency, whether it's a man or a woman. The image does matter. I agree with that, but like, why it would be any stranger for it to be a woman of her late 60s than a woman of her late 40s or a man of the 50s. That metric doesn't strike me as having a lot of merit to it. If anything, a woman might even have a harder time if they were coming in too young and not being taken as seriously. There's no way you can't take Hillary Clinton seriously. She has as impeccable a resume for this job as possible. So I can't. I mean, I could very easily see, just the same way there was some hope that Reagan was going to be taken down a peg in 1984 because he was a little off in his first debate, and Reagan very skillfully said, "I'm not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience." I think Hillary could very easily turn that around and say, "Why is it a problem that I have experience for this job? Now you're gonna hold that against me?" I mean, Reagan could do it as a man. Hillary could doubly do it as a woman, saying, "Women have heard every excuse in the book to prevent our advancement. Now you're going to do this? Give me a break."
Well, look, I suspect you're right. I suspect Rush is wrong. But my point is, it's not implausible, and he's clearly speculating because this is territory we don't know. We haven't had a female nominee for president, and she would be both the first female president and the oldest president. So it's pure speculation. I think my sense is you're probably right, and I think you make a very interesting point that in fact an older female may have an easier time than a younger female. Interestingly, I talked to Craig Shirley, a Reagan biographer, written a couple of really good books about Reagan, about the age issue and his advice for Hillary. And he says that, we all think about, you mentioned that 1984 line with Mondale, where Reagan sort of diffused the issue with humor, but Shirley reminds me that the age issue was an issue that went back to the first campaign, and that it was used, the George H.W. Bush's campaign used it, the media used it, and it actually did hurt Reagan. The polling at the time showed that it did hurt Reagan, and he said the problem was that John Sears, who was Reagan's campaign manager, took Reagan off the campaign trail, and that reinforced the notion that Reagan was too old. And so the lesson I think to learn here from Hillary is, if she didn't learn it last time, that the inevitability thing is a bad idea. You don't want to sort of do a rose garden strategy. Hillary, if she wants to overcome the age issue, the best way to do it is to run a very transparent, vigorous campaign. And again, it's easy. The shorthand is Reagan defeated the age issue in 1984 with that funny, humorous line to Mondale. But in fact, a closer look, this is something that Reagan had dealt with for years before, and the way he overcame it was by getting on the trail and sort of demonstrating day in and day out that he was up to the task.
No, I think that's exactly right. That if you're going to diffuse an opponent's manufactured narrative, the best way to do it is just showing how through your own actions their narrative isn't true. And the worst is, of course, if your actions confirm the narrative, which I think is what happened with Obama versus McCain. Obama was doing some tough stuff. The campaign was doing some tough stuff about McCain being out of touch, mocking his lack of facility with the internet, for example. Some people saw an age subtext in there. But it was only because McCain started acting kind of radically and kind of like, the angry old man on the lawn, that message began to stick, even though clearly McCain has his faculties, is clearly a vigorous person, clearly was up to the job. That wasn't really quite the charge. The charge that he was out of touch, and McCain kept doing things that made him seem out of touch, and age kind of got wrapped up in that. So if you're going to go after Hillary's age, if the way Hillary performs doesn't match that narrative, whether it's by her vigor, by her faculties, by her cultural references, by her ideas. You know, I mean, you say, is she going to bring back bad memories of 60s divisiveness? Well, if she's not talking about Vietnam, and she's not talking about Watergate, she's talking about the China's going forward, then she's not necessarily going to be identified by that. So I think it puts some pressure on her to perform, but I don't see in her general demeanor that she would necessarily fall into those kind of pitfalls.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, first of all, I think that, 60 or 70 or however old, she would be, I think she would be, how old would she be, Bill?
I thought she'd be 69 in 2016.
So 69 isn't what it used to be. She could be a young 69. And she's vigorous, and I think that she could demonstrate on the trail that she has energy and that she's vigorous, and that would really undermine this. Now, let's say she falls off the stage like Bob Dole did, right? Or she, stumbles in a debate like Reagan did in that first debate with Mondale. Then I think it really opens the door for this message, this narrative to be advanced.
And again, she had that concussion recently, so everyone's going to bring that up if she had some kind of, glitch like that. They'd say, does she have a head injury? Is she losing it? And all that stuff would come out.
And I think the way that Republicans ought to handle this, again, is not to do it overtly, but to do it by subtly contrasting the nominee, which if it's someone like Rubio or Paul Ryan, would be very obvious. You could visually show them in a much kind of a Kennedy-esque figure against her. If it's someone like a Jeb Bush or a or a Chris Christie, even though Chris Christie's probably just as young, I don't know how old Chris Christie is, but he's probably younger than Rand Paul or around the same age. But in any event, it may be harder to do. Now with Jeb Bush, you've got the whole dynasty problem because. Imagine the Bush-Clinton thing. That would not be Bush versus Clinton. That would not be a good day. We've talked.
We have talked about it. I don't think people are as offended by dynasties as others. People tend to vote for familiar names, comfortable names.
That's why they're dynasties.
Of certainty
in America. That's why we have dynasties in America. Obviously, people like them. That's That's why the Kennedys.
Now, the fact that the story came out in the Times, the fact that the leading lights like Rover are even talking about this stuff, does that suggest some consternation, desperation, a sense that we don't really know how to run against Hillary? We can't do the kind of Clinton playbook that we did in the 90s. We can't knock her out the way Obama did by harping on her war vote. What do we do as Republicans to stop a Hillary freight train when she's going to unify the party? She's very well respected in the country. She's sort of seen as due. She's paid her dues for this position. Is there a sense in the Republican circles that we don't have obvious avenues here to go at her?
Look, there are different ways that stories get written. I don't think this is a story that Republicans were pushing to Jonathan Martin. Like, hey, I want to hit Hillary. We need to define her early. I suspect that Jonathan Martin went to them. I suspect he had the idea to do the story because it's an interesting story. And then he sought out sources, for quotes. So I don't think you can read too much into this story coming out. It's an obvious thing that's going to come up. Hillary is, the obvious front runner for the Democratic nomination if she wants it, and age is an obvious issue. So the fact that the story came out, I don't read a lot into it. I do think that there are, on one hand, the Republican Party has a much, much stronger bench. But the problem with that is that, whereas Hillary could essentially be coordinated and begin, raising money and coalescing support, the Republicans could have a very divisive primary. And so I used to be of the thought that was good and healthy, and that's a free market, let people fight it out.
And the best it can be. So it's been the way before.
But after 2008, I've come to sort of reevaluate that, and so I do think that Republicans should take Hillary very, very serious, and I think that if she's the nominee, you will see an effort to make it an historic election about electing the first woman. You could certainly expect the War on Women meme to be back. If Republicans nominate someone like Marco Rubio, they could make history themselves with the first Hispanic and someone who's young and Hispanic. There could be a lot of energy and excitement around that could compete with what's happening on the Democratic side. So I think it's important for Republicans to have a ticket that is exciting and inspirational as well. I will say this, there was a group called Ready for Hillary last week who opened this store, and they put out these Hillary T-shirts and logos, and it was very clear they were attempting to replicate the Obama design, the Obama brand, and capture that zeitgeist, and they really fell short. And I think that it will be hard for Hillary, in the shadow of Barack Obama, to strike lightning again and to be as exciting as Obama. That will be something she has to overcome. I don't want to make too much out of these T-shirts and logos that came out because it was just a Hillary, a pro-Hillary pack that put them out. But it did strike me as people trying very hard to be cool and to kind of, rekindle that Obama magic.
And if you ever went to the Mitt Romney online store, which I'm sure nobody did, that had a similar problem. It kind of felt like let's make an R with red, white, and blue, like Obama did the O, and we'll put it on T-shirts, and it'll seem really cool. And it clearly felt like a knockoff operation. And look, you're not going to.
It was perfunctory, and frankly, it looked like an Aquafresh.
Well, the Obama logo looked like the Pepsi logo, so I won't be too hard about that. But you can't rekindle the magic with it, especially with a different product.
Right.
Hillary's not a new figure. She's a battle tested figure. I mean, that's her. That you got to make that work for you, and not graft an Obama strategy on a Hillary strategy. I don't think it's going to work. But one side point I just want to make before I get into this other political Hillary story. If you've been watching what's going on in Australia right now, where the left of center party, the Labour Party, has been deeply split for years. They had Kevin Rudd as prime minister for a few years, and then he got ousted in an intra-party coup by Julia Gillard, who became the first woman prime minister of Australia without an election. It was intra-party coup. It was parliamentary system there. And then just last week, Kevin Rudd returned the favor and ousted Gillard, and now is back in the chair as prime minister. Because her popularity was so low, elections are coming up soon. There are people who thought that Gillard was a sure loser, and so they dumped her and brought Kevin Rudd back in, hoping that would make the race more competitive. And the conservative side of things, which is the Liberal Party there, they're trying to exploit this, showing how can this dysfunctional party be trusted to lead. And to have these two figures in the Labor Party constantly going at each other clearly doesn't help matters. In America, there was a risk of that between Obama and Hillary Clinton because of how bitter that primary battle was. And for Obama to have brought Hillary into the fullest Secretary of State and keep the party together, now you're not seeing an intra-party battle trying to block Hillary from this nomination. Most of the Obama people are like, great, this is fantastic, everyone loves her, let's just pass the torch and move forward. It's a totally different dynamic, and it really, I think, it's worth remembering that it was not a given that Obama was going to do that. It wasn't an obvious choice to bring her not just into the cabinet, but in one of the most prominent spots in the cabinet.
The Daily Caller had a fabulous story last week.
I thought that was a great story.
7 ways that Obama undid something to do with how Obama undid the Bill Clinton presidency. And one of them was that Obama actually respects Hillary Clinton.
which was the cheapest shot, as your colleague said on C-SPAN.
That was great. Anybody else would have tried this. For those who didn't see it, I have this YouTube clip that's great. My colleague Will Ron was on C-SPAN, and they went down the list. This was interesting because normally C-SPAN doesn't ask gotcha questions. This is sort of a confrontational interview. And the host of C-SPAN went down the list, and there were 7 ways. Like, one is, Bill Clinton signed DOMA into law. Barack Obama, under his presidency, DOMA was gotten rid of. And you go down the list, Bill Clinton said the era of big government is over. Barack Obama likes big government. And then you go to number 7 was Barack Obama actually respects Hillary Clinton. And the C-SPAN host turns to my colleague, Will Ron, for a response. And most of us would have tried to defend that. And Will just goes, yeah, that was a cheap shot. We take those sometimes. And just smile. It was the best. It was a brilliant answer.
That was well done.
It was very disarming, and I think it worked. Let me say this. I think I've hinted at this, Bill, on here today and other times, but I really want to stress this point. I think it is vitally important for Republicans to nominate somebody exciting to make history this time. I have a theory that you have to be a rock star to make it in the modern era. Reagan, Clinton, Obama, the presidents who get elected and reelected, and even George W. Bush to a certain degree, they have this, they're just a little different than everybody else. They're just a little, there's a charisma to them. They sort of stand out in a crowd. So Mitt Romney didn't have that. He was a great guy, good guy, nice guy, very good politician, but not a rock star. So I think you need someone who's a rock star. But I think we also need someone who's going to make history. I mean, if Hillary runs, she will be running to make history. She's an incredibly compelling, popular figure, and she'll be the first female president. And I don't think you beat that with Scott Walker. As much as we may like Scott Walker, governor of Wisconsin.
It's interesting, because as I mentioned, I think in the last show, I'm now reading the presidential biography of Taft. And one of his problems was that he was coming off of Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt was the first modern president, the first real charismatic president. And because before then you had more, it was considered unseemly to campaign for yourself. You had rose garden campaigns or front porch campaigns. You literally sat in your own house and people just come to you and you shake hands.
That's my kind of camp. That's my kind of. It's the Mr. Tony experience, as Tony Kornheiser would call it. I would just go to the Palm. I would go have lunch at the Palm. People who wanted to come and talk to me. That'd be great.
But Teddy Roosevelt was such a character, such a force of nature. Just an uncontainable personality. It transformed people's expectations of what the president should be like. And Roosevelt thought that Taft and were kind of simpatico and handed off the torch to Taft, and Taft beat William Jennings Bryan. But Taft was different in a lot of ways, and particularly personality-wise. He was old school. He wanted to really be a judge. His big dream, his job was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he just did not have the same kind of liveliness to the job that Roosevelt had, and that dragged him down. So going back to Reagan, maybe less so much H.W. Bush, but to Clinton, George W. and Obama, these are all pretty lively characters in different ways, but they're lively characters.
And if it were true in the days of TR, before TV, the internet age, all that, I mean, just imagine how much truer it is today that you have to be a rock star. I mean, you can be a senator and be boring as hell. There are a lot of them. But this is the big leagues. when you are president or running for president, this is the show. You were in the show, and this is the pinnacle. It stands to reason that it's not enough to just be like smart or talented or a successful politician. This is the highest office, and I guess it's not. I mean, you could say it's superficial, but it's not surprising that this executive position kind of demands rock star status nowadays.
Well, now, this other Hillary story in Politico was speculating, what if she doesn't run? And suggested that Democrats would be in such disarray if Hillary wasn't there. There is no plan B. You go to plan K. And they would be so demoralized if she didn't run. And I thought that was very overblown. You know, we've had situations where expected candidates did not run. I mean, 1992, everyone thought that it was Al Gore or Bill Bradley, and everyone thought at the end it was the Seven Dwarfs.
Cuomo.
And what's that?
Cuomo, right?
Cuomo was the big Hamlet on the Hudson thing, and people thought that
Tsongas.
You're left with Clinton, Tsongas, and Harkin and Bob Kerrey, and people thought these guys were second tier.
It was the B team. Yeah.
So we've had moments like this before where your 18 folks take a pass on it, but so many things are uncertain. 2 years, 3 years out. I mean, as you point out, the Republican primary is going to be a scrum. And you don't know who's going to emerge from that. So just that in and of itself, not knowing who your opponent's going to be, not knowing what the economy is going to be like, not knowing what the foreign policy future is going to be like, to say that, and your point is well taken that the Republican bench, I think, is more fleshed out than the Democratic bench. But sometimes people come out of nowhere. And it's not like they always have no governors or no senators. They may not be of the same national profile as some of the Republicans you talk about, but people with decent resumes who can still speak competently in front of a microphone on the stump. So I don't think that it's like the Democratic position is so precarious that only Hillary can save them. Democrats are still in a pretty good position, nationally speaking. They still have better ratings than Republicans, nationally speaking. So I don't think they have to put all the chips on Hillary. I mean, I think Hillary might make it close to a lock, barring other unforeseen events. But she's not the only choice Democrats have to go forward.
No, I think that's true. I think it's narcissistic to assume that we know everything, and that there couldn't be someone overlooked who would arise. Having said that, it does. If Hillary doesn't run, you got people. The most likely candidates to run are flawed. Martin O'Malley, Joe Biden. Andrew Cuomo, not rock stars. O'Malley's a talented politician, but he's got potential problems, scandals, and whatnot lurking out there. And then you've got people, I think someone like a Cory Booker in a few years could be ready to run for president. He'll be a U.S. Senator most likely, but he can't really run as a candidate for U.S., just elected at the Senate. Having been,
Barack Obama pulled it off.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you.
It's not impossible. It's not
often
impossible.
The man in a hurry gets burned. I don't think that's the obvious path. John Edwards is a classic example of someone who maybe if he took a breather, maybe he might have pulled it off and not gotten so many problems. But sometimes, I mean, the case made to Barack was like, this is your moment. Like you got everyone's attention right now. You're not going to have this moment again, so you might as well strike while the iron's high. I don't know what Booker might do upon winning a Senate seat, but maybe he gets a moment. You just never know.
It's not impossible. And so, I mean, I guess maybe that, I think he's unlikely, but that's an example of someone, like, it's possible that Hillary doesn't run, and you have, sort of the Joe Biden, O'Malley floundering, and someone like Cory Booker gets in and becomes president. Not impossible. anything could happen.
Woodrow Wilson, who followed Taft, I mean, he was just elected. He hadn't run for any elective office before. He was elected governor in 1910. And ended up being president in 1912. Only a year and a half of being a governor under his belt, no federal office at all. So I mean, these weird things do happen sometimes. I mean, it's not typical. You wouldn't bet the house on it. But it's silly to suggest that the Democratic chips are in one basket. Now, on the Republican side, there's a lot of chatter how the immigration debate has affected the Rubio stock. And I know some Republicans have said that he has dropped, and I know Jennifer Rubin is out there saying that's bunk. Look at the polls. He's still polling pretty well amongst Republicans. He can't say he doesn't have a shot here. And I agree with Rubin on that as far as it goes. But I do have a piece that should be published at theweek.com later this week, if not up by the time the show is up. I do think that his argument. So I don't think he's at the rock bottom poll wise, but his argument for the presidency has taken a hit. I do think he's the big loser out of the immigration debate in that he was set up as being the linchpin. He was set up as this is the guy who's going to bridge the Tea Party and Latino community. He's going to reach out to the Democrats. He's going to sell the Republicans. Throughout the legislative debate, his every utterance was parsed for hidden meaning because he was always, kind of half in, half out. And when he was in, everyone thought this was going to pass. When he was out, oh my God, it's all going to fall apart. And then at the end of the day, he didn't bring any conservatives by himself. All his time on conservative talk radio and Fox TV didn't win converts. He got Bill O'Reilly, but he lost Hannity. Hannity had been a convert to the immigration cause after Romney lost, and then he slipped away after all of Rubio's lobbying. He didn't take Hannity didn't get personally on Rubio, but by any stretch, he didn't keep Hannity in the fold. Glenn Beck's now got him out to be public enemy number one. And on the inside game, he wasn't any serious help. He embraced John Cornyn's border security amendment, which the rest of the Gang of Eight rejected, as seen as a deal breaker. And then other Republicans said
because it was actually the Cornyn amendment. I think was actually better, tougher than what they got.
Instead they got is Corker Hoven. Am I pronouncing his last name right? Probably not. Hoven. Which took advantage of the fact that the CBO score came out really great. Got a big pile of money, and they threw all that money at the border through the Corker-Hoven amendment, and yet, Rubio didn't think quickly or creatively or enough to come up with the idea himself and make that his amendment or work with Corker and Hoven on it. So he wasn't he didn't seal the deal at the end of the day. So I don't see how he doesn't get the credit in the pro-immigration community for having saved the bill, making it happen. But he's getting a lot of blame from Glenn Beck and Ann Coulter, and he's becoming more of a negative commodity in Tea Party circles. So I end my piece by suggesting if he wants to get this credit, he needs to do something that's going to, because the deal's not done yet, so going to get through the House. He's obviously not a House member, but is there something that he can do that he's uniquely suited to do to get this bill over the finish line? And I think there is, and he kind of half did it in one of his final floor speeches, but it got overshadowed because he started that speech by talking about he was sort of personally wounded by the attacks he was getting, and no, this is not about winning favor from the establishment. This is not about being a Washington deal maker. This is not about positioning myself for higher office. And, of course, once you say those things, everyone, it's like, don't think of an elephant. Well, of course it's what you're trying to do. You keep talking about it. So his whole speech got obscured by that. But the second part of the speech, which I thought was much stronger, was talking about all of the nonsense that's circulating on conservative talk radio and circulating amongst Tea Party circles, that this is going, that the Homeland Security Secretary could waive all the border security requirements, which is not true. That Congress could just strip all the funding, which is not true. There's safeguards for that. That this is going to subsidize people buying scooters, which is just ridiculous. And so Rubio walked through all that stuff to say, look, he said, look, if this stuff was true, I understand you're not being for it, but it's not true. And the stuff that conservatives wanted, toughening up the border security first, that stuff is actually in there. So we actually won our argument, and you got to discount all these lies. I mean, he kept saying his refrain was, "This is not true." Now, I think if he went back on the conservative talk show circuit, perhaps maybe more friendly audiences, maybe stick to O'Reilly and Hannity, leave off Glenn Beck, and just walk people through what's true and what's not. I think he still has the biggest platform of anybody else out there. If he can damp down some of the conservative outrage by saying, look, conservatives, we got what we wanted, that there are people who are just anti-immigrant, who don't have conservatives' best interest at heart, who are obscuring the fact that we won by giving you this false information. This is the truth. I think that would be a help, and he would then, at the end, be the final link to getting this thing passed.
Well, I think you're too hard on him, Bill. First of all, I think you can't underestimate how difficult this role was.
Totally agree.
This was a profile in courage. It was incredibly risky. And frankly, I think he did an amazing job of selling this to conservatives. Nobody else could have done it. And it's easy to sort of quantify like where it didn't work. He didn't get Glenn Beck, let's say. But what about the shot that wasn't fired? Or what about the shot that would have been a 10, but instead was a 5 or a 6 or a 7? Or what about the fact that it was delayed, that Rubio held off the onslaught for a month so that the bill could actually start working its way through? So I think a lot of the criticism was blunted. He delayed criticism, and I think it was really as good. There is no conservative who could have done better. Rush Limbaugh himself could not have sold this any better. So I think that he did as well as was humanly possible, because this issue is so divisive, so controversial, so emotional, and there's so many conservatives who are so, fired up about this. I will also say that we're already seeing people like Con Carroll at the Washington Examiner who have been incredibly critical of Rubio and of the immigration reform bill, who the day after it passed the Senate said, okay, let's not beat up on Rubio. He didn't, I may disagree with him on the policies, but he didn't accuse us of being bad people. I think he handled himself in a classy manner and was respectful of the opposition and tried to reach out to us even if we disagreed. So let's not take him down. Look, I think that this was very risky and very likely could hurt him in a Republican primary. I think in a general election, this is a huge win for him. Whether it passes or not, I think that Rubio is seen as championing the cause of immigration reform, and I think that in a general election, he now has this points on the scoreboard for having fought for and championed, landmark legislation that did pass the Senate. He was at the forefront of it, and I think it's something that, although it may not play terribly well in a Republican primary, will play very well in a general election setting. So I kind of disagree. We agree a lot. I think you were too hard on him in this
Well, I totally agree with you. That's a profile in courage. He stuck his neck out, big risk, high bar for success. I agree with all of that. And I think it's as a reminder, this is why a lot of politicians don't try to compromise, because
absolutely,
it's often very high risk, low reward, and you don't have full control over the outcome. And if you don't get exactly what you want in the end, or you get shunted out, you tend to take on a lot of water. I think Obama suffered a lot of that.
much smarter politically to do what Rand Paul did, which was to say you're for immigration reform, to talk about it, and then vote against the bill.
Yeah,
don't champion it. Don't expend too much. He can sort of be on both sides of this issue.
Right,
whereas Rubio, staked a claim to it, and that has consequences.
Even though Rubio voted for the Cornyn Amendment, which didn't pass, Rubio could have taken his marbles and gone home at that point. And probably maybe that would have sunk the bill if that was the case. But I think Rubio did the honorable thing and stuck with the bill. That was still generally what he was trying to get. And Rand Paul did the cowardly thing, try to get some cheap points for saying he generally is for it, but not willing to do the hard work to actually get a bill passed. So I don't say this as I don't want to be that hard on Rubio in this instance. I like praising the compromisers in general. I like people that do things, that don't just carp about things. So I do think Rubio deserves a certain degree of credit, but I think he's not going to get this credit as it stands because of how things played out at the end. And that's just an example of political life being unfair. I think Obama often didn't get a lot of victory laps after the Recovery Act passed or when Obamacare passed or Dodd-Frank passed, because these are all tough compromises and things that made parts of his base unhappy, and people still grouse about these things. But at the end of the 4 years, Obama was in better shape, having taken those lumps, fended off those criticisms, and said, you know what, I did 4 years and I did stuff, and I didn't just sit around and thumb my nose at people.
Well, the other thing too, Bill, that you just hinted at that I think is important. Think of what Rubio and his team have endured in the past month. The attacks, sticking together. Think of the camaraderie that builds and how it tests a team and prepares you for a presidential run. They have been under attack, and they've had to figure out how to, keep going, wake up the next day, even when people are calling you a traitor, even when people are saying that you're a traitor to your country, and just horrible things about you. To get up and go on TV, to go into hostile territory on TV, to go on conservative shows where they've started to turn against you, to give a speech, to hold your head high, and to stay together with your campaign team under fire. That's a test, and I think it's hard to quantify how important that might be to a team heading into Iowa, heading into New Hampshire, who's taking oncoming fire.
And it's unusual for a early prospective presidential candidate to go through that process before the primaries begin. The primary process is all about pandering to the base. Bill Clinton didn't pull Sister Soldier until after the primaries was over. That's right. For later. It'll be interesting to see how does this affect Rubio's posture. Does he feel like he's got to mend fences after this? Does it steal him to say, you know what, maybe I don't need these guys. Maybe I have my own place that is not contingent on the Tea Party, and I can chart my own path, or some mixture of the two. John McCain, was someone who had a lot of friction with the hard right, and he still got through.
Rubio's not going to do that. Rubio's a lot smarter than that.
But McCain still got the nomination in 2008.
He's going to do what he thinks is best. He's not going to pander. He's going to do what he thinks is best, but then he's always going to be gracious. That's what I like. That's one of the things I like about him, is that demeanor. He's not above asking people for their support, and if people are off the reservation, trying to win them back in. He's not going to be like McCain with the AIDS and intolerance. I think he's going to have very inclusive rhetoric, and I think he's never going to quit asking the Tea Party and conservative activists to join him, even if the instinct might be to say, "Screw you guys, I'm taking my ball and going home."
But no, I think that's right. He's not the same personality type as a McCain or a Chris Christie, for that matter.
Right.
But does it? I wonder if there does produce some subtle changes in how he positions himself, where he's still going to reach out to everybody, but internally, does he see himself as somewhat separate now? he's not necessarily of the movement, but still but sort of rising above that and being a more unifying party figure. And does that change his position on other issues? I don't know.
Well, it'll be interesting to watch, and I think that Rubio Hillary would be an amazing presidential campaign.
It would.
And it would be an historic campaign. You would have youth versus experience. You would have the first Hispanic president possible versus the first female president. It would be amazing to watch.
It would, but I would enjoy Hillary Rand Paul more.
Hillary Rand Paul.
I would enjoy that debate very much.
Right, and as we talked about before, where do the neocons go? I mean,
right.
You could see if they may go with Hillary. But I think Rand Paul could be. I think Rand Paul would lose, but I think he could be exciting, and he could possibly have a lot of young people, getting involved in a sort of libertarian-leaning conservatism. So it could be very exciting. Absolutely.
Well, should we leave it on that note, sir?
I think it's a good place to stop.
Happy 4th to you. Happy 2nd and happy 4th.
The 2nd. We celebrate the 2nd.
The real holiday.
Yeah, that's right. All right, well, have a happy Independence Day to you and yours. I do recommend, if you're going to celebrate Independence Day, do not listen to that Martina McBride song, which is actually about murdering her abusive husband. I recommend a song by Scooter Jennings about the 4th of July.
That's a great song. That's a great
song.
Shooter,
and I said Scooter. Shooter Jennings, I think is his name, right? It's Waylon Jennings' son.
Right.
Is it Shooter? I think it's Shooter.
It is Shooter.
Shooter. I know you're into the alt country scene. Shooter Jennings has a good 4th of July song, much better than Martina McBride's Let Freedom Ring song. So, check it out.
And if anyone in New England, there's only one place to celebrate the 4th, the Chesterfield 4th of July Parade. That is old school 4th of July Parade. The Scher family will be there. Matt, you should why celebrate in D.C.? Go to New England, where the 4th is, where the Constitution happened.
It's a good place to be.
Or Pennsylvania, somewhere around there.
And it's cooler, too.
That's true. All right. Have a great week.
You too, man. Thanks.